Detroit Lions are the next San Francisco 49ers. At least that's the comparison we keep making. And while I do think it is a very good comparison, it's definitely somewhere the Detroit Lions want to be in 2020, and there are some pretty good similarities, I think I may have found an even better team to compare the Detroit Lions to for the 2020 season. But let's get it started. Welcome into another video, guys. I'm glad you guys are here. And today we are comparing the Detroit Lions to a different team not named the San Francisco 49ers, instead the New Orleans Saints. Now, when you look at the San Francisco 49ers comparison, it's a really good one. I actually did a video on it. There's a lot of things that you can say that, okay, the Detroit Lions could be like this. Kyle Shanahan's third year, Matt Patricia's third year. The San Francisco 49ers, Jimmy Garoppolo got hurt. They lost a lot of games. They had a high pick in the draft. They got Nick Bosa, who kind of really transformed their defense, and all of a sudden they're really good. When you look at it, there's more than that, but it's just kind of a little overview. Look at the Detroit Lions. Matt Patricia's third year. Stafford goes down. They get the third pick in the draft. They get Jeffrey Okudah, another player out of Ohio State. Maybe their defense gets really good. Maybe that team takes it to the next level. Maybe they go from worst to first like the 49ers basically did. That's a great comparison. I think there's a lot of similarities there. However, I think when it comes to on-the-field play style, I think I may have found a team that even fits more of the mold like the Detroit Lions would want to be, because both of these teams, what the Lions are striving to be is not necessarily what they're going to be. This is like the ceiling. This is where you want to get if you're the Detroit Lions, because there's certain things that these teams do, like win a lot of football games. You want to get to that point, but they do all have different play styles. And what I was doing is I was looking at numbers from every team in the playoffs, trying to figure out, who does what's the most consistent way to get into the playoffs. And, I think running the ball is very important. However, every team can get in different ways. Some teams you'll see get in because they rush really well. Some teams you'll see get in, they pass really well, and their rushing game is, just about average. Some teams, their defense carries them. Other teams, their defense isn't even that good. It's the offense that carries them. There's a mix of literally anything, and every team has a different way of getting in. Some teams are better than others. Like the Philadelphia Eagles, they were like above average at everything. They weren't great at anything. The Dallas Cowboys, I don't know how that team didn't make the playoffs. They were like good at everything, but I think it's because they lost head-to-head to the Eagles, but they could have easily been in. I think there's a lot of different ways to get into the playoffs. So there's not just one way. There's not just one strict way that says, okay, if you can't run the football, you can't make the playoffs, because that is not true. We've actually seen that proven wrong before, and we saw it last year. However, running the football is very important when it comes to playoff time, but it's not the only way to make the playoffs. And we know, I think right now our goal is to make playoffs. So yes, the long-term goal is to make the Super Bowl, but I think this year we would all love to be a playoff team. So how can the Detroit Lions do that? That was the question I was asking myself. But one team kept coming up with the Detroit Lions that looked really similar statistically across the board, and I was like, wow, this actually could make sense that the Lions could be like this team in 2020. If the Lions do have this great year next year and they're really good and we're up there and we're a playoff team and they live up to all the high expectations that we're hoping for, right? If you guys have any high expectations, I know some people don't. If they live up to that, they could be like this team, and that's the New Orleans Saints. So I went by the numbers here. I'll talk about the numbers. We'll talk about the roster, stuff like that. There's just a lot of things that I think the Detroit Lions do similarly. Now, obviously, maybe the schemes aren't the same and stuff like that, but I think they do have a pretty similar play style and similarities at certain positions and statistically. So let's run through the stats real quick. But these are really cool. So the first thing I looked at is rushing attempts. I feel like rushing attempts is like an underrated stat to look at, because how many times does the team try to run the football? Are they really trying to establish that run game? Now, I did come up with the rankings here, and once I decided that I'm going to go and compare the Lions to the Saints, because I was actually going to compare them to the Chiefs, but I just think there's a couple of things too different from what the Detroit Lions are hoping to accomplish in 2020. So I went with the Saints. So we're looking at rushing attempts in 2019. Now you got to keep in mind, the Lions were without Stafford for 8 games. The Saints were with Bridgewater for 5 games, so keep that in mind as well. But looking at rushing attempts, the Detroit Lions had 409 rushing attempts in 2019. Not bad, 409. Okay, cool. Darrell Bevell comes in, right? He's trying to establish run game, 409. The New Orleans Saints have 407 rushing attempps. So 2 more. I mean, it's basically the exact same. The exact same, basically, in rushing attempts. Wow, that's pretty darn similar. So apparently, they like running the ball about the same amount of times. Okay, that's kind of cool. What about rushing yards? Well, the Detroit Lions average 4.1 rushing yards per carry, and the Saints average 4.3 yards per carry. Obviously, when you look at the attempts and how they're so similar, that would mean that they had about 100 more rushing yards than the Lions did. Okay, so pretty similar there as well. The Detroit Lions this offseason really addressed that position. The Saints had some good running backs, and they're kind of returning them, right? We know Alvin Kamara is going now onto his contract year. He's going to ball out this next year. The Detroit Lions just brought in DeAndre Swift, so we don't know what we're going to get from him, but we do see that's still pretty similar in numbers. All right, well, let's look at passing the football. How often do the Lions pass the football? What does their passing yards look like? Well, last season, now keep in mind, again, Matthew Stafford missed 8 games. I think Bridgewater 5, which kind of evens it out, but not really, because it's still 3 more games. But But looking at passing attempts first, the Detroit Lions in 2019 had 571 passing attempts to the Saints 581. That's still super close. Look at passing yards. The Detroit Lions, as in total, had 3,900 passing yards on the season, while the Saints had 4,200 passing yards. Now, that's about 300 yards difference, which is a little bit more than the other stats, about a game difference. But, again, keep in mind, when Matthew Stafford was healthy, if you look at yards passing per game, the Detroit Lions would have been first because Matthew Stafford threw for 312 passing yards per game. The team that finished in first last year was the Tampa Bay Buccaneers with just over 300 passing yards a game. Wow. So they would have definitely beat out the New Orleans Saints in that category. But you can see a lot of similarities in how many times they like to throw it, how many times they like to run it. And to me, that's a little bit different than the 49ers, right? Because to me, I like the 49ers. I say, okay, yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things off the field that they might have the same in common. But when you look on the field, like especially at the offensive side of the ball, the San Francisco 49ers are a pounded type of team that just kind of uses that passing game to mix things up. When you look at the Saints, they're kind of a pretty good balance. And I think that's what the Lions were last season. They were a pretty solid balance, but I still feel like they're more of a Matthew Stafford-led team, Matthew Stafford-led offense, not a Kerryon Johnson-led offense. Maybe they run the ball even more next season with their new running back. But again, when you look at the Saints, they're still more of a Drew Brees-led offense, not necessarily an Alvin Kamara-led offense or a Latavius Murray-led offense. So I think there's really good similarities there. We'll get to more of that in a second. So passing attempts are similar, passing yards sort of similar. When you look at, here's probably the biggest difference I came across. So far, the numbers have been very similar. But here's the biggest difference and what really, I think, separated the Lions from the New Orleans Saints. I mean, obviously, you know, when you lose your quarterback for 8 games, that's not good. And I don't think last year we had a backup quarterback like Teddy Bridgewater that was, you know, that reliable. So I think that definitely hurts. But here's the biggest one. Turnovers. Now, the Detroit Lions weren't terrible in the turnover category. However, they did have 23 turnovers lost on the season. Compare that to the Saints, who had 8. 8 turnovers lost. I'm pretty sure that was a record as well. 8, that's probably the biggest difference out of all stats. A lot of the stats are similar. That is a huge difference. Not turning the football over for the New Orleans Saints. We know Drew Brees is really good, very efficient as a quarterback, and they didn't fumble a lot. Obviously, if you only had 8 turnovers on the entire season, that's 1 every 2 games. That's like nothing. Lions having 23 is more than 1 a game. That's not a good stat to have. Then you look at penalties. The Detroit Lions actually had less penalties offensively than the New Orleans Saints did. That doesn't seem right. I was not expecting to see that. Lions had less penalties than the Saints did. Wow, okay, that's pretty crazy. When you look at yards per play, the Saints have 0.5 more yards per play. And again, Matthew Stafford wasn't there. Still pretty similar, still in the same kind of range. So all of the stats offensively are very similar in kind of the play style that each of these teams have. Well, let's hop over to the defensive side. Now, unfortunately, with the defensive side, we don't really have a good way to look at this, right? Because last year, the Lions' defense was so bad, it's not really easy to say, okay, well, hey, let's just compare 2019 Lions defense to the 2019 Saints defense. You compare the Lions 2019 defense to any team, they're going to look awful because they were just bad last year. So I will mix in 2018 as well, just because, hey, for all the optimistic fans out there, we're really banking on that we can get back to that 2018 type of level. We don't have to be great. And that's another reason why I'm comparing them to the New Orleans Saints. See, the thing is, when you look at a team like the Niners, they love to run the ball, and they have a great defense, like the Patriots, a great defense. The Lions don't necessarily have that, and neither do the Saints. The Saints didn't have that either. I mean, they were a good defense, but they weren't like on top of the world. Look at a team like the 49ers. They had one of the best defenses in the league. They were like top. They were like second in yards allowed and 8th in points allowed. Now the New Orleans Saints were good. They were above average, but they weren't even in the top 10 in those 2 categories. So let's compare each defense from the last season, and I'm also going to throw in 2018 as well, just to give you guys a kind of a good feel on how, okay, maybe if that 2018 defense does kind of come back, maybe the Lions could be pretty darn good in 2020. So look at the defensive stats. When you start off with just yards allowed, total yards allowed, New Orleans Saints allowed 5,329 yards total in the NFL last year defensively. The Detroit Lions in 2019 allowed 6,406 yards. Okay, that's pretty bad. It's over 1,000 more yards. Their defense was awful. However, in 2018, the Detroit Lions only allowed 5,360 yards, which is only 31 yards difference. Okay, that's pretty close. How about points? In 2019, the Detroit Lions allowed 423 points to the Saints 341. Oh my gosh, we were bad. However, in 2018, Detroit Lions only allowed 360 points, which is only 19 points of a difference. Still pretty big difference, but obviously not 80. 80 points is pretty wild. All right, how about passing yards allowed? Well, in 2019, the Lions allowed 4,551 passing yards, which I believe was like last in the league, while the Saints only allowed 3,868. Look at 2018, though, the Lions only allowed 3,594, which is actually less passing yards allowed. So the Lions allowed less passing yards in 2018 than the Saints did in 2019. Now, obviously, you may say, well, this ain't fair to compare, two different seasons. But for the Lions' sake, I think it is, because this is what we're kind of hoping, because Matt Patricia's only been here 2 years. So he's seen a great defense and a good offense. We haven't seen them both. And I think last year there were so many problems. Not even the injuries. Like, injuries were bad. But, I mean, when players are doing that after the season, like they completely wanted out, that's a huge difference. No one wanted to play. None of those guys want to play for Patricia. Now those guys are out. You have new guys in that want to be here. That's going to make a huge difference. And again, if you don't want to necessarily look at 2018, you don't have to, but you got to keep in mind, and you're not going to be able to compare the Lions to anybody. The thing is, at least we've seen it before. So it's not like I'm just throwing out a number and saying, oh, hey, Lions could get to number 11 in passing yards allowed. But how do we know they could do that? Well, because they did it in 2018. But if we don't look at 2018, we would never know that the Lions could actually do it. We would never said, okay, well, at least Matt Patricia showed us that he could do it. Even with players that probably didn't necessarily love him here, at least he showed us that he could have that kind of a good defense. If you don't look at those numbers, you're never going to say, oh, at least he's shown us before. You'd be like, oh, how do I know he can do that? So that's why we're putting in those numbers as well. Looking at rushing yards allowed, 2019 Lions allowed over 1,800 rushing yards, and the Saints allowed only 1,461. However, in 2018, Detroit Lions allowed 1,761. That is the one place where the Lions need to improve, both 2018 and 2019. The Saints are one of the best teams in the league against the run last year. The Lions need to get way better there. They need to get way better against the run, and they talked about it. They got all these run stuffer linebackers. They brought in Danny Shelton. They should be able to stop the run. May not be top 5 like the Saints, but he should get better at stopping the run. And then finally, when you look at penalties, in 2019, defensively, the Lions had 117 penalties to the Saints 92. But again, look at 2018, Lions only had 94 penalties. So across the board, offensively, defensively, it's super similar. It's super similar defensively if you take into account 2018, but even offensively, they're similar. There's just a lot of ways that you could look to say, okay, the style's a little bit of the same. Now, when you look at the rosters, if you simply just go through a couple of players on the roster, you'll see that, those are kind of similar as well. The quarterback position. Obviously, the New Orleans Saints have Drew Brees. Now, Drew Brees is kind of a veteran quarterback who is still the main part of that offense, right? He makes it go. He puts up a lot of numbers. He's a very efficient quarterback. We have Matthew Stafford, same kind of situation. A veteran quarterback, less efficient than Drew Brees by far. Every time they play each other, they're really good games. It's kind of similar there. Look at the running back position. Obviously, the New Orleans Saints have Alvin Kamara and Latavius Murray. And when you look at the Detroit Lions, Murray's one of those bigger running backs, 6'3", 230. Kerryon maybe more similar to him than DeAndre Swift is. Maybe a guy like Bo is more similar. But then Lions also have a guy like Swift. And Swift is known to catch the ball in the backfield like Alvin Kamara. Now, what's great about Kamara is you look at Kamara's stats and you're like, oh, wow, this guy had 80 receptions. You're like, okay, Kamara can catch the ball in the backfield. Really good out there. But when you look at a guy like Theo Riddick, and this is kind of interesting because I'm looking at this because if you think Stafford, he can make his running backs look really good. Look at Theo Riddick. Theo Riddick is nowhere near the level of a guy like Alvin Kamara. However, in 1 year, Theo Riddick had 80 receptions with Matthew Stafford. 80 receptions. So that shows you that he can get a running back there. And now you take it and bring in a guy like DeAndre Swift, who's supposed to be a lot better at catching the football and running the football. There, again, you can see similarities between Swift and Kamara, who actually did a versus. I didn't do a versus, but I actually compared them before in the past. I don't remember what video that was. At fullback, they had Michael Burton, who I believe was actually our fullback at one point. At wide receiver, they have Michael Thomas. We have Kenny Galladay. They have Emmanuel Sanders, they brought in as a veteran. We have Marvin Jones Jr. They have Smith. They have Traquan Smith. We have Danny Amendola. Okay, we have a lot of similarities to wide receiver position as well. We have some really good wide receivers. Both teams do. At tight end, they have Cook and Hill. The Detroit Lions have Hockenson and James. Kind of a mix there at tight end. Offensive line, they ranked 5th in the league. Lions ranked 11th in the league. When you look at the defensive line, at defensive end, they have Cameron Jordan, who had 15.5 sacks. We have Trey Flowers, who we think if we put some talent around him, he could have those type of numbers. DT, they had Sheldon Rankins. The Detroit Lions now have Danny Shelton. I just think there's a lot of similarity. I just think they're not exactly the same, but there's a lot of similarities between these two teams. Look at cornerback. They got Marshawn Lattimore, right? They got Janoris Jenkins. To me, that's like Jeffrey Okuda's Lattimore, and Janoris Jenkins to me is like Trufant, right? Both veterans. Jenkins is 31. You look at Trufant is 29. Both veteran cornerbacks. They have Williams. We have Justin Coleman. Just a lot of similarities. Look at the safety position. They have Gardner Johnson. They have some young safeties, and then they bring in Malcolm Jenkins. We have some young safeties, and then we bring in Deron Harmon. I think if the Lions are reaching to be a team in 2020, and there's one team that they're saying, okay, let's look at this team. Let's try to be like them in 2020. It's not the San Francisco 49ers because their play style is so different, and the Lions aren't necessarily built to be like the 49ers. I think the running game can be better, but I don't think they're built just like the Niners, right? However, if there's a team that I think the Lions could be reaching for and saying, hey, we can be like that team if we play at our best, that is the New Orleans Saints. So I just thought I'd make that little bit of a comparison there. Like, they have Demario Davis at linebacker, we have Jamie Collins. I just think I think across the board, numbers, roster, I don't think we're exactly the same. We don't play the same schemes, but I think there's also a lot of similarities there on the field, more than there is with the San Francisco 49ers. And obviously, we both get cheated in playoff games, so that's a huge similarity. And if the Lions can be 13-3, I think every fan here will take it. I don't think we've ever been 13-3. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and I'm out.